My fiancée dumped me for a billionaire 3 years later. She begged for a second chance. The ring was still in my pocket when she said the words that ended everything. I'm leaving you, Marcus. I'm marrying someone else. I stood in the parking lot of the restaurant where I'd planned to propose, holding a small velvet box that had cost me 4 months of savings, and I watched the woman I loved get into a black Bentley that wasn't mine. She didn't even look back. My name is Marcus Webb, and 3 years ago, on what should have been the happiest night of my life, my fiancée, Elena Castillo, left me standing on a sidewalk in downtown Chicago for a man worth $2 billion. What she didn't know was that the humiliation she handed me that night would become the exact fuel that rebuilt my entire life from the ashes she left behind. This is the story of how losing everything taught me to build something no one could ever take away again. I need to take you back to the beginning, because you have to understand what we were before you understand what happened after. Elena and I met in college, at a coffee shop near campus where I worked mornings to pay for my engineering degree. She was studying business, sharp and ambitious, the kind of woman who had a 5-year plan taped inside her closet door. I fell for her laugh first, then her mind, then, slowly, all of her. We dated for 6 years, through my entry-level engineering job that paid barely enough to cover rent, through her climb up the corporate ladder at a marketing firm, through my parents' divorce, her mother's cancer scare, 2 apartments, 1 dead car, and 100 small fights that always ended with us falling asleep tangled together, apologizing before we even remembered what we were angry about. I thought that meant something. I thought 6 years of surviving hard things together was a foundation. I was wrong. It was just a waiting room. 2 months before the night I proposed, Elena's marketing firm landed a new client, a private equity fund run by a man named Julian Voss, 38 years old, self-made, $2 billion, according to the profile I found later, built from a chain of logistics companies he'd bought and restructured in his 20s. Elena started working late. That part didn't surprise me. She always worked late when a big account came in. What surprised me, looking back, was how she started talking about Julian, not as a client, as a person. Julian said this brilliant thing today. Julian took the whole team to this restaurant. Marcus, you wouldn't believe the wine list. Julian doesn't even blink at numbers that would terrify normal people. I noticed. I just didn't want to see it. We'd been together 6 years. I told myself that meant I knew her, that I could trust the shape of us, even as small things shifted. That was my first mistake. Comfort had made me blind, and blindness is expensive. I'd been saving for a ring since the year before. Nothing extravagant. A modest solitaire. The best a mechanical engineer's salary could buy without going into debt. I picked the restaurant carefully, Aurelio's, the Italian place on the river where we'd had our first real date. I told the manager it was a proposal. He promised candles, a private corner table, the good silverware. I had it all planned. What I didn't plan for was Elena walking in 15 minutes late, her phone still in her hand, her eyes somewhere else entirely. "We need to talk," she said, before I could even pull out her chair. I remember thinking, in the stupid, hopeful way people think right before their world ends, that maybe she'd found out about the proposal and wanted to talk about our future together. I had no idea the future she wanted didn't include me at all. "Marcus, I've met someone," she said, flat, rehearsed, like she'd practiced saying it in the car. "It's Julian Voss. I know how this sounds, but I can't keep pretending anymore. I want a different life. I want the life he can give me." I actually laughed. A short, disbelieving laugh, because my hand was still in my pocket, still touching the velvet box, and my brain hadn't caught up to what my ears had just heard. "Elena, I was about to propose to you tonight." Her face didn't crack. That's the part that still visits me sometimes, late at night. She didn't cry, she didn't hesitate, she just said, "I know. That's exactly why I had to tell you now, before you did something we'd both regret." We'd both regret. As if my love for her was the mistake. As if 6 years of my life was a rough draft she was allowed to discard because a better offer came along. She stood up, straightened her jacket, and said the sentence that I have never, not once in 3 years been able to fully forget. You're a good man, Marcus. But good isn't enough anymore. I want more than good. I want the version of life Julian can give me. I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry enough to stay. Then she walked out of Aurelio's, out of the restaurant with the candles the manager had lit for our engagement, and got into a black Bentley, idling at the curb. I stood on that sidewalk holding a ring nobody would ever wear, watching taillights disappear into traffic, and something in me went completely, permanently quiet. I want to be honest with you about what came next, because this isn't a story where the heartbreak magically transforms into strength overnight. That's not how it works. What came next was 6 months of the ugliest grief I've ever experienced. I stopped eating properly. I stopped calling my friends back. I'd come home from my engineering job and just sit in the dark apartment we were supposed to share, staring at wedding venues I'd secretly bookmarked, at furniture we'd picked out together for a future that no longer existed. My mother started calling every day, worried, and I'd let it ring out because I didn't have the energy to lie and say I was fine. The worst part wasn't losing Elena, it was losing the story I'd told myself about my own life, that I was building something solid, that loyalty and steadiness counted for something. Elena had made me feel, in one 5-minute conversation, that everything I valued about myself was actually a weakness, that good was a consolation prize for people who couldn't get great. I saw the engagement announcement 4 months later. Elena Castillo and Julian Voss, photographed on the deck of his yacht off the coast of Capri, her hand extended to show off a diamond that made my modest ring look like a joke. The caption on the society page called it a match of ambition and elegance. I read that sentence probably 30 times, feeling something curdle in my chest each time. That night, sitting alone with that photo still glowing on my phone screen, something shifted in me. Not healing, not yet. Something colder and more useful than healing. I remember thinking, fine, if good isn't enough for her, I'll stop being good in the soft, small way she meant it. I'll become someone impossible to dismiss. I want to be clear. This wasn't about winning Elena back. Even in my darkest, angriest moments, I never fantasized about that. This was about never again standing in a parking lot, watching someone drive away in a car one couldn't afford, feeling like my whole existence was something to be tolerated until something better arrived. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more emotional stories like this. The first thing I did was look honestly at my career. I was a good engineer, but I'd been coasting, comfortable, unambitious, the kind of employee who does solid work and never asks for more, because asking feels like risking rejection. Elena's rejection had already shown me what happens when you play it safe and hope it's enough. It isn't. I decided I was done hoping. I'd had an idea sitting in a drawer for 2 years, a more efficient cooling system designed for industrial server farms, something I'd sketched out during a slow week at work and never pursued, because pursuing it meant risk, and loans, and the possibility of failure in front of people who already thought I was unremarkable. Elena's voice in my head, good isn't enough, became, strangely, the exact permission I needed to stop protecting myself from failure. I took the idea to my company first. They passed. Too niche, they said, not worth the R&D budget. So I did something that, 6 months earlier Marcus would never have done. I quit my stable engineering job, drained my savings, and started building a prototype in my apartment, then in a rented garage when the fumes from the soldering got too bad for the apartment walls. The first year was brutal. I lived on rice and eggs. I missed 2 rent payments and had to ask my brother for a loan I was ashamed to request. I got rejected by 11 investors who told me, in 11 different polite corporate ways, that I was wasting my time. Every rejection landed like an echo of that night outside Aurelio's. Every single time, I heard Elena's voice, good isn't enough, and instead of breaking me further, it hardened into resolve. The 12th investor said yes. Her name was Rosalind Chen, a former data center executive who'd gone independent to fund exactly the kind of unglamorous, practical engineering plays that bigger firms overlooked. She looked at my cooling system prototype for 11 minutes, asked 4 sharp questions, and then said, "This is going to save data centers a fortune in energy costs. I'm in." That single yes changed the entire trajectory of my life. Within 18 months, my company, I called it Verity Thermal Systems, because I wanted a name that meant something true, had contracts with 3 regional data center operators. Within 2.5 years, we'd been noticed by a much larger logistics and infrastructure conglomerate looking to modernize their server operations across the Midwest. That conglomerate happened to be Voss Capital Holdings, Julian Voss's company. I found out through a mutual industry contact, almost as an afterthought in a business email chain, and I remember sitting completely still at my desk for a long moment, absorbing the strange, almost cinematic irony of it. The man who'd taken my fiancée now needed my engineering. I want to be honest. For about 10 seconds, some old wounded part of me wanted to gloat, wanted to march into a boardroom and announce exactly who I was. But the version of myself Elena's betrayal had forced me to become wasn't interested in petty theater. I was interested in results, so I let my company's actual values speak instead of my history. Verity Thermal Systems won the contract on merit. Voss Capital's operations team reviewed 4 competing proposals, and mine wasn't the cheapest. It was simply the best engineered. When the final approval email came through, it was signed by their chief operations officer, not Julian himself. I wouldn't actually see Julian Voss's name attached to anything personal until months later, at the signing dinner neither of us knew the other would be attending. The dinner was at a hotel in downtown Chicago, a mid-tier celebration for closing the largest contract in Verity's short history. I walked in wearing a suit that actually fit properly for the first time in my adult life, feeling, for the first time in 3 years, entirely comfortable in my own skin. And there she was, Elena, standing near the bar in a dress that probably cost more than my old monthly rent, laughing at something one of the Voss executives said. She hadn't seen me yet. For one suspended moment, I watched her the way you'd watch a stranger, objectively, without the old ache distorting the image. And I realized something that hit harder than any revenge fantasy could have. I felt nothing. Not longing, not anger, just a quiet, clean absence where 3 years ago there had been devastation. Then she turned, and her eyes found mine, and I watched her face do something I will remember for the rest of my life. Recognition, then confusion, then something that looked almost like fear. "Marcus?" she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "What are you doing here?" "I run Verity Thermal Systems," I said. "We're the company Voss Capital just contracted for the data center retrofit." I watched the calculation happen behind her eyes in real time, the same sharp, ambitious mind that had once decided I wasn't enough now trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the man she'd left in a parking lot 3 years earlier. You did all this?" she asked. "I did," I said. "Turns out heartbreak is excellent motivation." I didn't say it cruelly, I said it plainly, because it was simply true, and because, for the first time since that night at Aurelio's, I didn't feel the need to perform anything for her. Not anger, not indifference, not triumph, just truth. She looked, for a moment, like she wanted to say something else, but Julian appeared at her side just then, shaking hands with the Voss executives, and the moment dissolved into the practiced choreography of a corporate event. I shook his hand too, briefly, professionally. He had no idea who I was to Elena. Why would he? I was just the engineer who'd fixed his server infrastructure. That anonymity felt, strangely, like its own kind of victory. I didn't think about that night again for almost 6 months. My company was growing. I'd started dating again, carefully, and had begun seeing a woman named Priya, a hospital administrator with a steady laugh and zero interest in performing for anyone. Life had a shape again, a good one, built entirely on my own terms. Then, on a Tuesday evening in early spring, Elena called me. I almost didn't answer. 3 years and 1 professional handshake hadn't changed the fact that her name on my phone screen still sent a small, unwelcome jolt through my chest. but curiosity, or maybe some old, unfinished part of me, made me pick up. "Marcus," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on my name. "I need to talk to you. Please. Can we meet?" Against what should have been my better judgment, I agreed to coffee, not because I wanted her back. That door had closed completely somewhere in the last 3 years without my even noticing the hinge give way, but because some part of me needed to hear, out loud, whatever she'd called to say. She looked different when I saw her. Thinner, tired around the eyes in a way that no amount of expensive skincare could fully hide. The engagement ring that had once seemed to swallow her hand was gone. "Julian and I called off the engagement 4 months ago," she said, before I'd even sat down fully. "It's over." I waited. I'd learned, in the years since our breakup, that silence often does more work than questions. "It wasn't what I thought it would be, Marcus," she continued, her hands wrapped tight around her coffee cup. "Julian's world. It's beautiful, but it's cold. Everything is transactional. Every relationship, every dinner, every vacation, there's always some angle, some advantage being calculated. I spent 3 years performing a version of myself I thought I wanted to be, and I woke up one day and didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. I'm sorry that happened to you," I said. And I meant it, in the distant way you feel sorry for anyone's genuine pain, even someone who once caused you enormous pain of your own. "I made a mistake," she said, and her eyes were wet now, urgent. "The biggest mistake of my life. I left the one person who actually loved me for someone who saw me as an asset to manage. And now I see you, successful, grounded, exactly the man I always secretly hoped you'd become, except you became it without me, because of me, and I have to live with the fact that I threw away something real for something that turned out to be an illusion." Then she said the words I think she'd been building to since the moment she called. "Marcus, is there any chance at all, that we could try again? I know I don't deserve it, I know what I did. But I've never stopped comparing every man I meet to you, and none of them measure up, because none of them are you. If this were a different kind of story, this is the moment where old love might have reignited, where the years of grief might have resolved into some tidy, satisfying reunion. But I'd spent 3 years building not just a company, but a version of myself who no longer needed Elena's approval to feel whole. And that version of me understood something she still hadn't fully grasped. Some doors don't reopen just because the person who closed them changes their mind. "Elena," I said gently, "I'm genuinely glad you're figuring out what you actually want out of life. I hope you find it. But I'm not the consolation prize you return to when the better offer doesn't work out. You told me, very clearly, that good wasn't enough for you. I believed you, and I built a life around people who think good is exactly enough, more than enough. I don't want to go back to being someone's backup plan." She started to cry, quietly, and part of me, the human part, not the wounded part, ached, watching it. But I didn't reach for her hand. I didn't offer comfort I no longer felt equipped or obligated to give. "I'm with someone now," I told her. "Her name is Priya. She's kind, and she's honest, and being with her doesn't feel like an audition. I wish you find that too, genuinely. But it won't be with me." I paid for both our coffees, an old habit, maybe a final kindness, and I left her sitting at that table, the same way she'd once left me standing on a sidewalk. Except, I didn't feel triumphant walking away. I felt something quieter and more valuable, complete. I want to tell you what I learned, because I think it matters more than the specific details of Elena, or Julian, or the company I built out of spite that eventually became something I'm genuinely proud of, independent of any of that. Heartbreak strips you down to what you actually are, underneath the relationship you built your identity around. For a long time, I thought losing Elena meant losing my worth. It took me years to understand that her leaving wasn't a verdict on my value. It was simply a mismatch between what she wanted and what I was willing to become just to keep her. The tragedy wasn't that I lost her. The tragedy would have been chasing her approval forever, shrinking myself into whatever shape she demanded.